On today's episode of The Crow's Nest, we are joined here in the nest by the dynamic duo, Robert Avery, aka Bobby A, and the Haitian wanderer, Joseph Mark. And on today's episode, we will be answering a question. And I don't want to give this question away just yet, but I want you to know we are going to be entering my own personal time machine. And we will do a little exploring. We will explore this world that we all live in, and we are going to explore time. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you my luxurious and gracious listener this next conversation. I hope you enjoy.
So you always hear people talking about, oh, I wish I was born in this era. I'm more suited for this era. You're an old soul. Things of this nature. So that got me to do an introspection of myself and to see where would Robert Avery fit the best, and not just fit, but just personality-wise, perspective-wise, fashion-wise, interest-wise, everything. Where do you see yourself? Where would you like to place yourself, essentially? So what the topic is where would you like to spend the prime of your life in terms of time period, in terms of location? All right. It could be anywhere in the world, it could be any time period, but where would you like to spend the prime of your life?
Okay, so why don't you start? Why don't you, since I know you've
Okay.
been thinking about this over the course of your life, why don't you tell us the story of where you'd want to be and what you'd want to be doing,
Yes.
or what you might be seeing?
Okay. So it's an easy answer for me, but first let me say the periods that were in the conversation for it as well. Um, I would I started mulling over what it would feel like to be from the ancient times. So it doesn't matter where in the world we're talking. It could be Mayan, Incan, Egyptian, Roman, Greek, East Asian. It doesn't matter. Um, Largely because I want to know how people live day to day during the antiquity period, but also a little bit because I want to know if the ancient astronaut theory is really true. And it would be good to know if I was living in that time, if these star people are what I think they are, living in this time period and watching all the stuff that I like to watch, as the audience should know by this time. So I was mulling that over, but there's a lot of things about the antiquity period uh, that, in terms of perks, in terms of material wise, and things like this, religion, especially Roman, like religion was a big thing. You could be killed if you weren't following the same religion and things like this. I don't want to be persecuted, so things like this. So that was out. But although I am curious about that time. And another time that also, the second time period that intrigued me the most, and it may be um, because of my interest in like the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and the time of the plague and stuff like that, was like the the English, let's say the 16th century England or United Kingdom period, the Britannia, uh, where there's knights, there's damsels in distress, there's kings, there's there's serfs. What are they called, Chris? They're serfs, I believe.
Yeah,
Serfs.
a surf. A
Yeah,
surf would be like, yeah,
yeah,
the lowest of the low,
correct,
kind of.
correct. So like that, like basically the Middle Ages period in Northwest Europe. So like I would envision myself as a knight in that period and things like that. But and that stems from like Game of Thrones and all the other things and things of that nature. But obviously, what I settled on and what was always going to be the winner, this is 1930s Hollywood, Los Angeles, and 1930s New York. So, so it's I would live in New York day to day, but I would also have a house in LA, and probably around Venice Beach, close to like maybe a little closer to Santa Monica in the 1930s. So we're talking Howard Hughes time period. That's the time period we're talking. If anyone's seen The Aviator, that's exactly the time period I would like to live in.
Okay, so why? Why? Because
All
that's
right.
not that. I mean, that's not that far away. Um, in our history, what about it? Was the fashion? Was it just like the budding Hollywood scene? What aspect
Right.
really draws you? Did you want to be an actor? Is that why?
I've never wanted to be an actor, but I've always wanted to be in the entertainment business, more of like a writer or producer. So more like Howard Hughes. Like I'm not on the screen. I'm controlling what's behind the camera. I'm producing. I'm writing. I also have my other hobbies on the side, but it's more what you were alluding to, like the fashion, also the culture and the cosmopolitan lifestyle, where you would go out to these elaborate parties and there's just this big jazz band playing and everyone's dressed to the nines. Everyone has suits and dresses and scarves and hats, and no one has technology, so no one is interested in looking down at their cell phone. They need to go back to their computer to do something. It's none of that. Everyone is present. They're always in the moment. They're always in the present. Everyone is always dressed up to the nines when they leave their house. Even if you go to the grocery store to get small items, you're still putting on a full suit. Uh, Also, you have like you said, the burgeoning art scene. So you have film is just taking off. Musical theater is just starting to take off. So you're getting like the birth, like the genesis of Hollywood at that time, right? And also, it's just a little more simple. Like no, you weren't expected to always be at a certain place at a certain time. People had a lot more patience because you can't just phone, like now you can just phone someone up, and if they don't answer your phone call or message, you're like, what are they doing? Because they can be reached in their pocket. It's just the mentality and the perspective that everyone had at that time. And on top of that, you had a lot of good, like just academic stuff. So this is when like all the colleges and like kind of toward the tail end, that was like late 19th century, early um, 20th century, where you had all like the academic scene was getting really big, and you had all these inventors and all these philosophers, and especially in American writing and history. This is when you had like Hemingway was going, like all the good American literature was happening in the early 20th century and things like that. So that was cool. You get the good literary scene. You get, like you said, we get the film, entertainment, creative art scene, which was just starting out. We have the fashion scene. We have a simpler lifestyle where no one had any type of technology, and they were more present in the moment and more into human to human interaction. And yeah, so but those are the things that appeal to me in that. It could go a little deeper just like philosophically, but I want to hear what you guys have to say first, and then I can go.
All right, cool. So let's say Hollywood. Let's all whenever we suggest like a place, let's all talk about it too
Yeah,
because I'm curious now. I didn't. I never
yeah,
really thought about. I've seen movies of that time period, and there is an appeal to it. Like I'm The Aviator, obviously.
yeah.
Um, there's other ones I can't even really recall at the moment. But like, yeah, there's that cool factor of that time period in the country, but also in Hollywood, right? You're right. Like the dressing, the parties, the kind of the lavish lifestyle. I mean, that was probably the era of the the Hollywood star, right? That's where
Correct.
the idea of celebrity probably really took off was that time period.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that would be interesting to live in that time period if you had some money, if you were part of that scene and you got to really like yeah, live lavishly. Like it's one thing to be um Howard Hughes of that time period, someone who's like extremely wealthy and can like live, you have all of the benefits of wealth and also a lot less supervision, right? Cuz that's kind of it sounds like that's what you're talking about, right? It's like now just kind of an interesting dark side is that right like now
Mhm.
you can be wealthy but there's a limit to really what you can do in the open if that makes sense. Like if you have a big Hollywood party and everyone has phones, it probably is a little bit different than the Hollywood parties of the 1930s. Like, I would imagine you had orgies happening. Like, that was not an uncommon thing. Um, but now it's like there's a little bit more like, everyone's a little bit on is privacy no longer exists as we talked about before. So I would imagine that what you're talking about is like Hollywood of the wild, wild west. And if you were really connected in it, it's probably an amazing time to like place to live and be. And all the cool, crazy cool things came out. All like very, all these movies that were probably like these epic films
Yeah.
came out of that time. And if to be part of that would be really interesting. But for me, I don't think it would be where I would want to live. Joe, what do you think about that? Hollywood,
In the
1930s,
30s,
LA, that scene.
but also New York, like New York in the 30s was cool too. But go ahead, yeah.
I'm kind of astonished that you picked the 30s. Um, I mean, it's kind of the country's still reeling from like the Great Depression, and there's rumblings about them going into World War II. It I could definitely Hollywood at that time. Especially it's kind of burgeoning. All of these studios, like these um, private, small in-house studios, are kind of popping up, like Warner Brothers
Hmm.
and I believe uh, Paramount as well.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of stuff opening up, and you kind of once you get your foot in the door, you can actually kind of make a name for yourself. But it's still a struggle out there. Um, I everything that you said to this point, I was completely shocked. I didn't think you would go to the antiquity kind of era.
Yeah.
I thought you would say a little bit more 20th century, more like the 80s or 90s. I'm kind of shocked.
80s is a good time too. That's close. I would love to be a teenager in the 80s too. Um, but I like what you said. It's like at that time, especially in the major places like New York and Los Angeles, if you had an idea, it could be unorthodox, it could be unique, but because everything was just in its infancy, really, you could really go off the wall and people were still down to produce it and stuff. There wasn't the established like I would say now everything with Hollywood is almost formulaic. So it has to be like okay, we need this type of audience. We need the East Asian audience. We need the Latin American audience. We need everything is put into a computer formula and it's like if your idea is not coming out and giving us what we want, it's never going to happen. Whereas that time it's just starting. They're like, yeah, you want to make a picture? That's where and Howard Hughes makes that. I forgot the actress that's in it, but they have a scene in the aviary where he was like, and his Odie, his assistant, was like, "Are you sure you can make a movie about this?" And he's like, "Yeah." Like, who else is making movies like this? Like, what else is coming out? I forgot the goddamn actress though. But yeah, it's like stuff like that. They were willing to experiment and they were willing to go with almost any idea that would draw an interest.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'm recalling a film history class I took way back,
Yeah,
and if the night maybe it was the 1930s. I mean, when did um when did Hollywood start?
probably like 19 late teens, early 20s.
Yeah, because I think there is a time in cinematic history where a lot of the laws that limit what you can and can't do didn't exist. So like
Mm.
there are films that came out of Hollywood that had nudity in it and like probably this time period, like the 1920s, 1930s, before a lot of the laws were put in place to stop that. So I think, yeah, I mean that would be because when you were talking about that, I was gonna disagree with you. I was gonna say, well, Hollywood of that time was all about the studios. The studio was king. Like you weren't gonna make a film unless you were like if you were an actor, like the indie scene, I don't think really was you went to Hollywood to work with the studio, and then you had contracts with the studio for multiple films, and you were kind of locked in those contracts. Like Hail Caesar, if you recall, I think that was kind of that time period, maybe a little bit later. But they even talk about like you would be like, all right, I have to do 3 4 films, like it's in my contract. I'm doing them with whatever studio. Maybe it was MGM or whatever. It's like, all right, I have a contract with MGM for 4 films. I got to do it. But you're right. Maybe in that time period, yeah, you could kind of make whatever you wanted because there wasn't the amount of
Yes.
oversight on that industry.
Right. No, no. Hail Caesar was more like 40s. That was like the 50s.
Okay.
So that's when the um what's the government agency, the FCC
Correct. Yeah.
or the FCC was implemented all those federal laws and stuff like that. That was later. So in the 20s you can really get your experimentation on for sure.
Damn. That's yeah. So that would be kind of cool. And so, what kind of job would you want?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's one thing to live in the 1930s and be like a janitor, and another thing to be Howard Hughes.
I know. Yeah, no. I wouldn't be a janitor. I would be either a novelist or like a Charles Bukowski type novelist or or
Working at the post office. Okay, that's what he worked.
yeah, yeah, but like a cool writer at the same time. And or like I'm not saying I want to be like a star actor or star director or somehow in the film industry, either as like in production or in like working as the studio or something. It's like somewhere where I had access to, like you said, like the parties and I would get invited to all those type of things. I don't want to be the main attraction, but I want to be involved in it.
So what's one thing? All right, cool. What's one thing
Yeah,
you would miss though?
that's an excellent question. I would miss definitely if it's more athletic oriented. So if I lived in LA in the late 20s, early 30s, I wouldn't be able like I'm only seeing baseball at that time. There's no other sport that's happening in the 20s in Los Angeles. Definitely Los Angeles. There's no football, there's no NBA, there's no NHL, there's no NFL at that time. It's only baseball and I don't like baseball. So I would definitely miss sports big time. Huge. That's the one thing I would miss the most. I would have to watch a sport that I did not care for.
Oh man,
It's
sports.
true. And also I would miss like the cuisine. Like the cuisine was a little different at that time. It wasn't as like nuanced in because over time people learned how to blend like cultures and stuff like that. It would be a little bit different eating in Los Angeles during that time. And weed would be illegal, so that would be hard
I
too.
mean, I think the 1930s you could find it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just about to say, don't forget Prohibition was around that time as well.
Yep, yep. You could only drink at those parties. You couldn't just go buy liquor. That's right. Only like at like a Hollywood party you could find it.
What year was Prohibition?
20s.
Yep, from I think the 20s and then the early 30s.
So that's when Nookie Thompson was doing his thing in
Right.
Atlantic City.
Yes, yes. That's the 20s, early 30s. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah, Rob. I'm learning, and I should have already known this, but you do not like technology.
I don't. I do not.
'Cause I feel like this comes up. Yeah, that's all I was thinking you were gonna be like, I might miss, like, a computer or an iPhone or vi
Nah, I don't care about any of that.
like, no. The only thing I miss
Yeah, I
watching
would miss
sports,
hockey
like, that's the only thing I'll miss.
and soccer. Yeah. Because like I would only if I lived in like 1928 Los Angeles, I could only go to a Dodgers game. That's the only sport that's happening anywhere near. And I can't go on TV and watch fucking New York. That's never going to happen either. You're only watching local fucking Los Angeles channels.
I mean, dude, you ain't watching TV, I don't think, right? Like,
I'm not even going to watch TV.
your
Yeah, probably
TV?
not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, Joe, what do you got, man? Where do you wanna be?
Well, before I go with that, there were no Dodgers. The Dodgers moved to LA in the
That's
50s.
right.
So all you would have is college
So
football. That's it. Nothing.
I was
College
I
football.
was that's a great point, Joe. I was dead wrong. I would have no sports, so that's a big thing.
And
0.
also, you'd have to rely on radio, which is spotty at that time, to get other markets too.
That's an excellent point. So yeah, so that even that compounds my point. I would miss sports greatly because I couldn't even attend anything. I don't like college football.
I was listening to, the episode where we talked about sports, and it's like, it's funny, you guys love sports. I have to, it
Hmm.
is like an in this thing. It's on. It's like something.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to think. If I was in a situation, you know how you run that checklist in your mind, like, well, if I do this, what am I sacrificing? Am I sacrificing this? Am I sacrificing that? Like sports would never register as a sacrifice. Like, oh, if I go out this evening, I'm gonna miss this game, or if I move to this place, I might not get these channels which air these whatever. It's just not something that I would ever consider. But for you guys, I mean, it is, which is I guess it's kind of cool. I can't lie.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of my spring is planned around the Rangers games if they're in the playoffs. Pretty much all of my springs if they're in the playoffs. But yes, yeah, Joe is right. I sound dumb now. I take that back. I would have nothing, so that might have to change my answer. I would literally have not a single sport to watch. Jesus Christ. But all right, so we can move on.
But you have plenty of entertainment to watch
Oh
though,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you can even do your own.
exactly.
I mean, dude, if you lived in LA in the 1930s and you were connected like you would want to be to the Hollywood scene, and knowing you, Rob, as the sociable person that you are, I don't think you'd ever be home.
Never.
Or I should say, you probably would never be home alone. Like I just don't think you'd have a lot of free time to be watching sporting
That's
events.
right. You're exactly right. I would only be using my house as or apartment more like as a locker room. It would only be where I changed and showered and occasionally slept.
I mean, I think that you'd have a variety of rendezvous there with.
Yeah, I would never be returning alone. I would never be returning alone. We have Jean Harlow, Ava Gardner, Katharine Hepburn. Oh, you better be sure I'll be inviting them back.
All right, so here's one more question for you, Rob, before we move on to me and Joe and where we would want to be.
Okay.
If there was something that you could, let's say that in this scenario, it's a time machine scenario, right? So you are from this present time, 2020 New York, and somehow you're able to hit a button and you're in LA, let's say late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Now, in this scenario, your mind is wiped, but you can hold on to one detail. So let's say you know who you are, you know like your life story to some degree, but like there's information from from the future. You can only hold on to one detail, one fact, something that you could maybe use or find beneficial in this past, in this new era that you're living in. What would it be? Would it be like an invention? Would it be a fact? Like you're gonna play the stock market, or you're gonna like I don't know, invest in something that
That's a
you know
fantastic
is gonna
question.
bud off, jump off in the future. What would it be? This is definitely like a Back to the Future scenario.
Yeah, Back to the Future 2 question, Biff. So that's an excellent question because that wow. I'm stuck between two things. One would be, as you sort of mentioned, a factual like nugget for monetary gain, or would it be something more like existential for my own personal and perspective and things like that? Um,
Yeah, either or. It's up to you.
yeah,
I mean, the
that's
existential
tough.
part, I feel like you would
Yeah,
rediscover, right? Because that's you discovered that yourself,
yeah.
unless it was because you watched something.
Mhm. I would then, in order to plug myself further into that scene, I would take. This is literally what I would take. I would I would embed in my head a list of all the like famous directors and actors in Hollywood that were to come later, and I would search for them in Los Angeles and be so I could either manage them or be part of their projects, and I could say I'm the one that found Katharine Hepburn. So things like that, and then that'll just plug me further into the Hollywood scene. I would be, I would be like, I would want to be the makeup producer guy, like a Jerry Bruckheimer. I'm not directing anything. I'm not really directing anything. I'm just my name is just attached to the movie. I come onto the set, I hang out, I get the craft service, I shoot the shit with the actors. I'm on. It's cool. It's just all those cool things. I don't want to be in the movie. I don't want to direct it. at all.
You want no responsibility. You want to enjoy the party.
No, exactly. I just want to hang out. Yeah, I just want to hang out. Yeah.
All right, that may
Exactly. So it would be a list of all the prominent actors and directors of the late 30s and 40s, so I
Oh,
can have that foresight.
all right,
That's what I
right
would go
on.
back with.
Okay, so Joe, I have no idea what you're gonna say. Honestly, I'm very curious.
Yeah.
Where and when and what would you want to be?
Um, I kind of want to go with that last question that you gave Rob first, the time machine part. So
Okay.
basically, um, I'd probably go back to like the early 20th century, like 1900 or 1910, and try to get people off of like oil. I feel like that's like the genesis of so many problems that the that this planet kind of has. That would be like one big overarching thing that I would actually look at to try to change if I was going to go back in time. And then one personal one, I'd probably go back and try to figure out a way to keep the Dodgers in Brooklyn. Those are the two things I'd probably go back in time for to change.
Stop with the sports.
For the era,
It's always going to come back to
yep.
that. Shit, it's always going to.
So for the era, I would go back to like I would live my prime during the '90s. This I thought you would honestly go for the '90s, Rob. I was shocked. I did not see that coming. But I know for me, for the with the '90s,
80s and 90s are one of my favorite times. Yeah.
for me the '80s not so much because it's just it's a weird decade the from 1980 all the way to 1989. It's there's so many weird things that happen. But I feel like from 1990 to 1999, there was so much advancement with technology, with science, with music and film, and your beloved sports, Chris. Um, and I was there to kind of
Yeah.
experience it, but I wasn't my formative years really weren't kind of I wasn't there to really really take it all in. I was just kind of like a backseat driver. But if I was to go back into a certain time frame, that would be it. Definitely the '90s. And then a close second would be the time frame that I actually lived, which is the 2000s, because I just had so much fun then. I can't see myself really going back to any other time frame besides that.
Yeah. I don't want to live in the time where you can order pizza on a phone. You gotta go to the pizza shop and and order it, wait for it, and then you pick up a pie. That's what I want. That's it. That's it. I'm not down with this technology shit. But I do love the '90s though. The '90s had some of the best pop culture things.
Yeah, he doesn't like this technology as we use at least 4 or 5 pieces of technology to record this. Um, Joe, I'm a little surprised by that. I guess I kind of respect it honestly because you're pretty much saying that of all the times in history to live, you would want to live the time that you were born into.
So yeah. Well, first the technology was definitely advanced, but it's not to the way that it is now. So I could literally go home from a day of work, sit down, watch like one of my favorite TV shows, either like Seinfeld or Friends or The Fresh Prince, and just relax. I could call someone on a regular phone, not a cell phone. I'm not completely available to everyone at any time. Um, the music then was very much not this cookie cutter um, same type of music that's out now. It's kind of very diverse, especially year after year in the '90s. You go from grunge at the beginning, and then gangster rap in the middle, and then you have kind of like Brit pop in the middle as well, and then you go over to the late '90s where you have like full blown like pop or even R&B pop. So it's just eh, it's so much more, but it's not complete access like it is now. It's like the best of both worlds.
I could see the value in that because right, I think if you were to say like be in your 20s or 30s in the 90s, the 90s were pretty nice. I mean, right, there weren't really any wars going on. Well, there was the Gulf War.
The Gulf War, but even then,
It's pretty.
that wasn't as divisive as the wars that were out in the previous decades, like the
Yeah.
70s or the 2000s. Most people were behind the Gulf War for some weird reason.
Well, you're right. I would say like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the '90s there was more of a cohesiveness, at least in America,
Hmm.
right? I feel like more people agreed with each other than disagreed. Am I wrong to say that?
I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I think the '90s were the beginning, the seeds of what we're kind of dealing with right now. But it's still, yes, it wasn't as divisive.
O.J. Simpson, you're right. O.J. Simpson, N.W.A., the gangster rap. He's right. No, Joe's right. It's like that's the genesis of what we're seeing literally today, this week. What's happened in the early '90s.
All right, keep going. What would you want to do?
Ooh, media, probably probably like a news anchor somewhere, where it's it's definitely not as politicized to be on media, whether it's network news or cable news. It's just kind of more just telling the news to the people on what it is, not kind of putting your own little spin behind it. Is that some either just regular media or sports media, one of the two?
When do you think was the end of the like true newscaster?
Hmm. Um,
Right, because you just drew a line, right? You're saying that now people put more of their
yeah,
opinion involved, and it's less just reading the news. So when do you think that was the era of which that
yes,
ended?
definitely. I think once Fox News came along, but more so, even then, they weren't as bad up until Clinton was impeached for his sex scandal. But once that came along, that was it. There was no going back. And also, too, the cable news cycle. Everything is kind of like 24/7, and you want to find some kind of news. And the best way for you to get ratings in the mid to late '90s was to find whatever would be a big news cycle and then just put it out there and constantly cover it so that people could keep on watching. I remember as a kid, I was kind of confused what was going on with like the O.J. Simpson like scandal, and eh, all I kept seeing was this white Bronco going down this LA highway, and I just didn't know what was happening, and it's just constantly being covered. And I think the '90s were a big, they were the stepping stone to that.
That's interesting that you said. So would you say that the '80s into the '90s was kind of like if you lived in that time period, which we were all three of us were born into, then it was kind of like a lucky. It'd be lucky to spend that time because you're right. Like you're before the wave crashes. Like the wave is beginning to swell. Maybe unconsciously you can feel a little bit of tension, but it's not. It's really deep. It's like in the unconscious. But now we're actually living on the other side of that wave. Like the wave is crashed, and now it's like we're living through the result of that, the ramifications of that. But before that, like the '80s into the '90s, you kind of were on the maybe the better side of that wave. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Definitely, in so many aspects too. Um, you can even look at technology. There was a kind of a little bit of a backlash, especially against Microsoft because of their kind of heavy-handed ways in terms of trying to get rid of competition. But even then, it's not to the way that it is now, where the the big corporations really uh, hammer hard against up and coming corporations or even the smaller companies or smaller businesses. So in every aspect, the I would say particularly the late '80s and then early to mid '90s were a relatively peaceful time where people were kind of upbeat in terms of how things were going to play out because of the Cold War ending, technology uh, vastly improving how people's lives were to be lived. Things are things are drastically changing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one thing you that I like that you mentioned, which I failed to, is music. In the 90s, there was a bunch of, it doesn't matter what genre, a lot of good musicians and a lot of good albums and tracks were produced in the 90s. And that's kind of what the time period that I mentioned lacked. Yeah, you had a lot of like jazz and like lounge singing, but there was a lot of potential that just couldn't get out there on the airwaves like they were in the 90s. Very diverse collection of music. Very eclectic is the word I would use. All to every genre of music in the 90s had a great artist or like a signature album or a legendary song and things like this. So the 90s for music is might be the top.
Yeah, I never really thought about that because a lot of, like, you go on Spotify and you look at music genres. There are so many, right? There is a genre for everyone's taste in music. I mean, there's you could probably just throw together three words and somehow it's probably a genre out there. You know what I mean? If I said, like, I don't know, Asian polka dance, there's probably a genre that's about Asian polka dance music. I don't know.
Mhm.
But before that, right, in the 90s was kind of like so many different genres kind of just came out of the 90s and now have established and also probably spawned subgenres. So yeah, that's interesting that you picked that.
That's good. Uh, I do have a follow-up question, Joe. Uh, what were some of your favorite? You don't have to name the favorite, but what are some of your favorite artists and musicians or albums from the 90s?
Ooh, that's always a hard question for me to answer. There's so much. I know for me, albums. I want to say TLC, Crazy Sexy Cool. That one was really good. Uh,
Good one.
hmm. The Verve, Urban Hymns. That one was really good too. Damn, there's so much. Hmm. That's the thing, and that's what I really like about it. The genres are so plentiful, and then if you wanted to be an artist around that time, there's not a glut of artists. So you could it's hard to get in the
Yeah.
industry, but it's not hard to get your voice to be heard. So you can put yourself out there and you're not kind of lost in a sea of other artists like it is now.
But wouldn't you say that it's easier now because you have so many more avenues to be heard, whereas before, right, it was studios again, wasn't it? No? Am I wrong? I don't know.
Record companies, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. But I think Joe is right in that in this day and age, it's sort of like film, where if you don't have the certain look or you don't fit a certain formula, they're just not going to mess with you in any way. Whereas the 90s, it was more, I would say, genuine. There was more authenticity there, where it's more about the music and the sound. And now is, you have to be attractive, you have to look good on an album cover, you have to have good social media, you have to have a certain formula to you. It's more like there's more calculus and like regression models and statistics involved in art now than there's ever been. And you have to be able to satisfy those more than the actual art and the creation and things like that. So in the 90s, that's why it the 90s literally birthed all these genres, because it was probably the last decade, the last bastion of true artistry, where record executives weren't looking for like Justin Bieber is a formula. I don't care what anyone says. He's not a good Justin Bieber's not a good pop artist. He's not. I'm telling you, he's not. He's garbage. But he fits a certain formula with looks, social media presence, um, the audience that he can reach, things like this. It's all mathematical now. It's all plugged into a formula, and the 90s didn't have that. That was probably the last decade before it all turned into basically a math problem.
Also, to piggyback on that, a lot of like bigger artists weren't afraid to like tinker with their genre too. There are plenty of artists. I can think of two like right off my head, U2 and Madonna. They had so many different
Mhm.
type of albums that they came out with in just that one particular 10-year time frame that sounded very, very different from the stuff that they did before. And if they try to do that now,
That's right.
they couldn't survive. They need to stick to their kind of bubble.
That's right. Yeah, you could experiment more in the 90s for sure.
Joe, where would you want to live? You'd want to be in New York in the 90s, 80s, 90s, or did you have another place in mind?
Oh, that's another damn good question. Um,
Because I mean, that is a big question, right? Minnesota in the 80s and 90s is very different than, let's say, I don't know, LA in the 80s and 90s. I'm
Yeah,
not
sure.
saying anything negative about Minnesota. I'm just saying like it is that's a completely different place. So where would you want to be in the world? And also remember that you're more isolated in that time period as well.
yeah, that's true. I'd probably go with New York one, Seattle two, and probably London three. If I could go in that if I could kind of
All
go in
right.
that direction. But yeah, I would definitely still would love to be. This is my city. I don't know if I could truly ever leave it, either physically or mentally. If I left it physically, I would my heart would still be in the city. But yeah, definitely. But I I've been to Seattle a few times, and I can only imagine what it would have been like during the '90s when I feel like that decade is kind of where they really got their voice and they kind of broke out into, okay, this is a big American city. We're this is what we kind of stand for, these certain values, and we have a lot to put onto the table of American culture, whether it be film or music for sure, or your favorite sports. I think Seattle's a good place, and it's not as kind of gentrified as it is now because of like that's the thing. Microsoft, they just became big,
But wasn't Seattle
and Amazon, they started out in the late '90s, so they're not as back then in the '90s. They weren't as kind of crazy as it is now.
well, and didn't grunge come out of Seattle?
Yep,
Right? Nirvana came out of Seattle. Am I
yes,
wrong?
they
Am I
did.
right? Okay.
That's where grunge came from, the Northwest.
So you would be Joseph Mark in Seattle in the grunge scene, teared jeans. Right? Isn't that grunge? The whole teared jeans kind of came out of that. Teared jeans and flannel.
The flag. I was about to say that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The baggy jeans, not the fitted jeans. The
Oh
baggy
man,
back then.
I don't know if I could ever wear baggy jeans. Sorry, that's just not.
I mean, you can't be grunge then. You can't be grunge and wear skinny fit jeans.
It could be torn up skinny fit jeans.
All right.
Oh yeah, I think that looks worse in my opinion. You got holes in your fucking thing. I never understood that.
No.
I really never understood that.
No, what I don't understand is that with the teared jeans, but wearing like you'll see people that they have like they're wearing two pairs of pants. It's like a pair of pants that actually keeps you warm, and then the teared jeans that go over top of that. I never
Yeah,
understood it. It's such a ridiculous style.
I agree. I just don't get it. I would anytime I get a hole in my jeans like that, they're getting tossed.
They're gone, man. That's like
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so I guess it's my turn, and then I have a secret question for you guys. We can round
Right.
it off.
I do have
Go ahead.
one
Okay.
last thing. The movies.
Oh
I think the film in that time frame was kind of revolutionary, and it set the stage for the movies that we have, like Jurassic Park and Terminator Two
excellent call.
and True Lies. Like the
Rock.
movies in the '90s were, yeah, The Rock.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Right.
uh,
The 90s was the like the hallmark of action movies. That's a great call.
but not even
No, yeah,
even like the romantic. I feel like romantic comedies during the late '90s, that was like its heyday, and it hasn't been the same since.
that's right.
Sci-fi
You
too.
got mail, 90s, sci-fi. Yeah, I mean, I would say sci-fi started more in the '80s, but
But I feel like with sci-fi in the mid to late '90s, it took it on a whole nother level.
it did. Yeah, it's because of the we had CGI at that time. So,
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you got to think the Hollywood blockbuster came out of the 90s.
is absolutely correct. Yeah.
I would push back on that. I would say the '80s started it.
All right, maybe the late 80s. I'll give you that. But like pretty much the 90s was I would say is when we really started to use like that's a blockbuster,
The summer
right?
Mhm.
blockbuster. That's correct. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Because The Rock, that was a blockbuster
Yeah.
film. Like,
Yes.
the Batman movies were usually like big, big productions. Um,
Like all the movies you named, like True Lies, summer
yeah.
blockbuster, even like the disaster movies,
Yeah,
Independence
yeah.
Day, Deep Impact, all in summer. Everyone was focused on the summer during the '90s
And the
because we
action star came out of the 90s. I mean, before that you didn't I don't think had real I mean, maybe not. Like Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford was an action star, but I don't think they would refer to him as an action star back then. It might have been like an adventure movie or an action film, but like Arnold Schwarzenegger is really a creature of like the early 90s, and that I think he was like the
yes,
first bona fide like this is an action star. This is, this is his genre. It's action. It's big, it's physical. I think that was a creation of the
that's
90s.
right. That's why I love Last Action Hero. You guys remember that movie? It's like a satire of what we were just talking about, the summer blockbusters in the '90s. That's a great movie. Also, Charles Dance is the villain. For everyone who forgot about that, Charles Dance has a glass eye in Last Action Hero. He's the villain.
I don't remember that. Holy crap. I Wow.
That was Charles Dance, man. Yeah.
I trust pretty much any pop culture reference Rob makes because
Yeah.
he doesn't just watch stuff, he like studies it. He doesn't just watch, let's
Yeah.
say, Back to the Future. He's gonna be like, well, actually, the person that was analyzing the script, the background lighting expert, his name is this. He worked on this film. Like you
True.
delve deep in anything you watch or are
That's
fascinated
right.
by.
And yeah, that's exactly right.
All
Thank
right.
you for that.
Oh, dude, 100%.
And I mean, and it's like you said, we got the I think you're exactly right. We'll move on to you after this, but we also got like the movie Babe and like the Hollywood hunk from the '90s, those '90s blockbusters too. Like McConaughey starting getting big in the rom coms in the '90s, and like the starlet, like
Yeah.
just the glitzy starlet started like Joe said in like the '20s and '30s, and you said the same thing, Chris. But like with like the sexy babe started in like the '90s.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because I think
Yeah,
before what we considered cool was like a little bit different. Like it was more like even the action, the hunk character was a
yeah,
little bit more refined, had a little bit more of an
yeah.
edge. And now you have like think about what did LA look like in the 90s, right? You had that's the bodybuilding scene. That's when people started pumping iron and stuff like that where before like if you look at like a Gary Cooper or a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood or
Clint Eastwood.
or Paul
Yeah,
Newman. Like these guys were just I mean they were normal kind of looking guys. Maybe
yeah,
they were handsome, but like if they took their shirt off, they were normal humans.
yeah. They were
Yeah,
slender. Yeah,
and then the '90s was like, the sun and the buns, right? It's like, get these guys
yeah,
are all in
exactly.
shape, the women are beautiful. I think cosmetic surgery kinda started to creep its way into Hollywood. You got, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger looking like an Olympian, an Olympic god in
Yeah,
Twins. Remember what he looked like in Twins? He looked like
he's enormous. Yeah,
not even enormous, but, like, enormous, like, carved out of marble, like, that
exactly.
that look, that was from that time period. I mean,
That's right. That's where you get the Zubas and the tank tops or the '90s. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
mm,
You
yeah,
had what is it? The hammer time pants was the 90s as well.
right.
Yeah, interesting style too.
Yeah,
All right, my turn. Phew, I don't even know if I have an answer for this. Um, I would not have chosen the 90s or the 80s, Rob, not at all. I'm not Joe. That's farthest from my mind. The 20s and the 30s, Rob. I could see the appeal of that if I had the like if I was connected in the Hollywood scene of that time period, it would be fun. It'd be really cool. Think about all like amazing stuff came out of that time, and to be part of that would be really really interesting. And the privacy element would be cool, but I don't know if I'd want to do that. Ancient times, I mean, there's a lot of historical stuff I would like to have bared witness to, but I think I would have died. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think about, like, as far as, like, sacrifice, like, if I it'd be kind of amazing to have lived in Rome and to have seen that or to have witnessed it, but I would also probably ended up being a soldier, and I would have probably died, so there goes my legacy, my offspring wouldn't exist probably. Not to mention that you're taking a dump outside in a probably just a I don't even know where you were taking a dump in Rome in ancient times. So there's a sacrifice. I'm still gonna throw it out and just say like it would have been amazing to have lived in like let's say like a biblical time or in a current of like in a time where let's say Jesus existed and you get to actually see those events and be like all right the the belief of these events has affected so many people. It would be amazing to see what actually happened and be like, oh, this is an eyewitness report. Like I saw it, I know. Or to have met like a Buddha or any, fill in the blank, any one of these historical figures that we believe we know, but we can't be certain. So like that would be cool. Um, and again, I think to live in those times with means would be awesome, but how long would you live? I don't know because you don't have all of the benefits of technology. You don't have medicine. You don't have these things. Imagine living in like, you know, Samaria, ancient, the Middle East in the summertime without an AC. Like just these little things are not going to be fun. But I think I'd say that. I think if I could go back in time and I had to live 20s and 30s, I, I don't know, man. It's a tough question. I think to live in like an ancient Rome would be interesting. If I could take back, like if I could also bring back some know-how, some technical innovation, some little tidbit that could give you like a huge advantage. Um, I just kind of think it would be interesting to live in a time, and this is more up your alley, Rob, to live in a time where there was still mystery and where like people were not discovered and literally like aliens appearing, like people would pop up and you'd be like, holy shit, like where did they come from? I didn't know they existed. And maybe they looked different or they had some weird culture where it was like that was like experiencing meeting aliens. Like you're just like, I don't know who the fuck are you? And I think there are historical counts of that happening where some people show up and they've been around for a long time, but for whatever reason, lives didn't interact. So like a different civilization didn't know about them, and then they just appear. And I think that's just kind of cool, like to be like, oh my goodness, like you're in, you don't know what's going on in the world. There is mystery, there is danger, and to me, I kind of fall into the camp where like danger, I don't think I would willingly want to put myself in danger, but I do see like a value in it because it kind of lifts up all other aspects of your life because you're like, all right, like I don't know if today will be my last day. Like there are dangerous things I could come in contact with. So I better appreciate this. Like I better appreciate this meal or appreciate this time or appreciate the getting to sleep or whatever. Because it is like it's a dangerous it was even more so a dangerous world. So I kind of think I like that feeling of possibility. And I think we have that now, but I think some of the mystery is kind of taken away. Like people are for better we're more the same than we are different nowadays. Because of technology, because we can kind of all consume the same media, right? Like Friends or Seinfeld. Take Seinfeld, like you said, Joe. I can watch Seinfeld, but now that Seinfeld is on Hulu, I think, someone in a completely different culture that's never been to New York, doesn't know anything about it, doesn't know about America that much, like they can also watch it and enjoy it. And now that's a point of reference. We can both make reference to this show. So like the lines, the cultural lines, like they're there, definitely. But they're also kind of waning. Like Game of Thrones was like that. Like I remember having a conversation with someone in India about Game of Thrones. And it was like, "Oh shit, like we have very little difference of like we didn't grow up the same, different cultures, different, native languages, just a lot of differences, but we're talking about Game of Thrones." So, I think back then there'd be that more mystery. Like you'd meet someone from a different part of the world and it would be like meeting a different species and you would start to talk and try, oh, you eat this or you believe that in that god, you do this cultural thing, like holy shit, like that's very different. Whoa. So I think for me it would be that, like an ancient time. Yeah, I think I would choose that just for the mystery, just for the possibility.
Well, where do I even begin with that one? So a couple things. I knew it. I knew you were gonna go antiquity. I just knew it. And
That's why I had to change the topic.
yeah, exactly. Um, but I like the way you explained it. It's you the just existence was so new to everyone at that time that a lot of things created awe and wonder, and it's a good time to live because almost everything you're experiencing was new. That does appeal to me as well. It's a little like you can look at the other side of that coin though. It's a little like off-putting, a little nerve-wracking that you just don't know. Like you just don't know what's going to happen. But um, I do side with you a little more. I like that sense of uneasiness and mystery, and especially when you get into like the mystical parts of like living at that time. Um, but my question, let's ask you the same question. What specific thing would you bring back with you? Would you bring back like some knowledge of the future so that you can kind of allay those fears?
I think if I could only bring back like one thing, right? I think I would bring back just some type of technological advantage. Something that, so like let's say just as an example, I go to a time like pre-steel and I know, oh shit, like well if you mix these ingredients now you have steel. Like something as little as that, which that's not really even little. Like that's a game changer, right? Cuz if you look at civilizations, like certain civilizations excelled because they learned about, let's say, iron before everyone else. And for that time period, before everyone else figured out the new invention, that one group who had that knowledge just decimated and controlled things. So I think some little technological invention, like knowing how to make steel or something like that, would be enough. I think that little thing right there, you could probably run an empire just with that knowledge alone. So yeah, something like that. Just like a little scientific innovation or some type of technology. Like you're not gonna make a computer, but if you know how to make steel, I mean, dude, it's over. Like you have a huge advantage in those time
Yeah,
periods.
so would you want to be like a smith of some kind where you're making the steel for everyone?
I'd try to be an empire,
You're
man.
gonna
I'd try to be an emperor.
that's all your all your military is using steel against everyone else's inferior.
You it would probably be done. I mean, there's a story about like this one sword. Sorry, I'm gonna go on a tangent for a second, but
No, please.
like there's a story of a sword, and I forget the name of it. It was like a Viking sword, and for whatever reason, the person who had invented it, and they were always signed. I think it was like an Itru or something was starting with an I, and it was always signed, so you knew it was like a legit. It's like a Banksy. Like you know that this is a legitimate Banksy sword. All right, and they've done like research on the sword, and it had a superior steel a mechanism to make steel. And that sword was then stronger, it was lighter, it was more flexible, and it became highly valuable. So like an army, there might be only like 2 or 3 of these swords in it because it was like prized, right? It gave you an advantage over everyone. So yeah, I mean if you had like a whole army with steel implements and no one was using steel, it's like going against like it would be like the Native Americans versus the colonists. they're shooting them with bows and arrows, but like you have a whole army with guns. It was that much of a decisive advantage.
All right, so go ahead.
I have a question for you. The the pros of not of being able to discover the unknown are so overwhelming as to know the cons of not having a lifespan that really goes past like 30, or dealing with, I know things are not stable now, but they definitely weren't stable then. You would still want to deal with those kind of life altering kind of uh, issues that they dealt with back then.
I mean, it's a tough question, right? Because you're right. I mean, you're dealing with plagues. You're dealing with think about the flu, right? I would imagine the flu still existed then, or some disease, and like people died frequently. Um, it's a tough one. I don't know, man. This is all we're just talking out of our asses. I want to say yes, but you're right. I don't know, but I, here's I'm gonna ask you a question, right? I'm curious, and I don't think there's any research on this, but I would imagine there was a higher suicide rate now than there was in antiquity. And you got to wonder why that is. And I could be really wrong. Anyone who's listening to this, like, please, like, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not. I haven't looked this up. I don't know, but I'm just speculating. I'm thinking because I imagine when life is hard and there is a threat, you're so worried and focused on the reality that I I almost see it as like a net positive. Whereas nowadays, like you have all of these things, right? Like, look, your lifespan, and we're gonna live. I am at. This is my belief. We're gonna live long. I think we are of the generation where lifespans are gonna be. They're gonna start to get extremely long. Like 120. I think someone will live to 120 of our generation. Just look at how fast technology has improved so quickly, and we're in our early 30s. By the time we are 60, who knows? Like, you really don't know. Like, I think it's a very viable belief that we will live longer. So you have all these benefits, right? You have vitality longer in life. You can stay interconnected with people. Life is is not nearly as hard as it has been historically on the planet. Yet we're killing ourselves. Suicide rate is like suicide rate of teenage boys and girls is higher than it's ever been. So obviously, safety and security are not a solution or solvent for happiness, and people are wanting to kill themselves and die. So yeah, I don't know, man. It might be that you go to those times, and because life is dangerous, you appreciate it more, and you don't off yourself. You're like, nah, this is life's hard, but I'd rather be alive than not alive. So I'm gonna work. I'm gonna do what I can. Um, like I think there was still suicide back then, but I don't think that to me. It's just I don't think. I think there's something to be said about danger as a positive thing. Um, right? Like I think when people say it, like when they're in a near death experience or life is kind of gets dangerous, like their senses become heightened. Things smell. They can smell things better. They can taste things better. They can hear better. And you talk about quality of life. Maybe that's a better quality of life, even if life is shorter. I don't know. Did that answer? I don't know if that answered your question, Joe.
No, it does. It's just that's definitely something I would not choose. I feel like life was so much harder back then, physically, mentally. Uh, it's just it's a tougher way of living, and maybe I know I feel like that's where you're probably getting to. Maybe that's a way to kind of get people back out of that kind of first world mentality that most of us live in now. But it's not something I ever want to be a part of.
Well, think about it this way: it's like both you and Rob, in your own ways, responded to the same thing, right? Rob was like, "I want to live in a time where there's less technology, it's less intrusive, there's more privacy. It's still modern, but those it's less technologically advanced, right? You were like, I rather live in the 80s and 90s. Still the same thing. It's definitely very modern, safe, all the security, but you don't have the internet really. You don't have social media. You don't have iPhones and smartphones. So in both your own ways, at least from my experience, my perspective, you are seeking a simpler time. It's just a question of how simple.
Yeah, I see what you're
No?
saying. And I've just earmarked. That's why I was typing. If you saw me, I just earmarked the topic for our future discussion, which is suicide, because that's a fascinating topic, and I love that you talked about that. Because um, I'm going to refer to you to one of my favorite writers, Camus, Albert Camus, and he's classified as an absurdist, which is an umbrella of existentialism. And he said suicide is basically a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Instead of doing that, you should embrace the pain and the meaningless of life rather than trying to reject the freedom of how it makes you feel. So we should definitely talk about that because that's crazy fascinating, and just not the way he describes it, but a lot of writers describe it. So, but I think to your point, I think the way suicide was viewed in antiquity was different than what it is now. Now it seems as almost as if it's sort of like, oh, it's okay. He felt hurt. He was in tremendous pain. But back then, it was also seen as an affront of your existence. Whereas, like, definitely religions frown upon it. All religions frown upon it because it was a sin, essentially. And just societally, they were like, why would you want to, why would you, why would you rather not exist than exist? And it was almost an insult to them. So they took it in a different way. But um but I see what
Yeah.
you're saying. Like that's but anyway, I'll stop rambling because that's part of it. That should be definitely a future
No, no.
topic. That in and of itself.
We can definitely We can definitely
Yeah,
talk about suicide at some point. It'd be interesting.
yeah,
Historically, I mean, it depends on the religion. I mean,
yeah,
Christianity, obviously. I think Islam
yeah.
is the same, Judaism
Yes,
the same. But like Romans were okay with committing suicide. I mean, it was usually often left as like a last like option. Like for example, let's say like let's use a current historic let's use Bill Cosby, right? Let's say Bill Cosby had this epic career and then all the stuff happened. And instead of like being prosecuted, the prosecutor said, all right, you have two options. Option one, like we take everything away from you, we put you in prison. Option two, you kill yourself. And all of your holdings, everything that you own will go to your family members as it should. So like a lot of in Rome, suicide, you could commit suicide, but usually it was not out of despair or desperation. It was like, all right, I'm done. They're giving me an option to end it on my own terms. And like obviously like samurai have a suicide culture. But I just think like and we can talk about this in another episode, definitely. Because if you're down, I would love to talk about it because it fascinates me as a subject. But now I think the suicide's a little bit different because the it's like you said, the problems are existential problems,
exactly.
less than reality problems. It's not like, oh, I have two alternatives. Like this bad thing happens to me in a real physical way, or my like whole legacy is going to be destroyed, or I end it on my own terms. It's like people are killing themselves over things that are like you said, like they can't see a way out of a problem, and the problem's like an emotional problem, or I just think it's different, and I could be really wrong, but you just when you have teenagers that can't like at 18 who can't see a way out of a like you're 18. You're you telling me you can't you have a lot of life ahead of you. Like the one thing that's beautiful about life is that like really anything can happen, both positive and negative. Like how many stories of someone who is at the bottom of the bottom at 20 and then somehow at 45 they're at the top. That's like a common story. Like you hear this. I don't want to say it's common as in like it will always happen, but Like lots of things can change. So that's why I would love to talk about that as a subject, because I do think, me personally, that that's a new phenomenon.
I agree. I think, yeah, we'll earmark that. I wrote it down. That's going to be in a future topic because that's easily a 2 hour discussion. Um,
That's a
yeah,
multi
yeah.
episode conversation. So I'm gonna. Oh, go ahead. Go. What were you
No,
gonna say?
so let's get back to. So you're going to go back to antiquity, but you're going to take back with you some technical, at least one technological advantage. Now, my question is, once you rise to power, what's your next move?
I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on the mood I'm in. I guess how big my empire is. Do I want to go on and do a conquest? Do I want to grow my empire as big as I can, or do I just want to kind of run it to the best of my ability, like sequestered in some remote place in the world?
Yeah, that's
I don't
you.
know.
You read my question perfectly. Are you gonna go Napoleon on us? You're gonna try to spread this the Corvo Empire, the Corvoian Empire? Yeah.
It's a good question, man. It depends on how good my system is. It might be that people start to say, "All right, take us over. We're cool with it. We want your management style." Um, I don't know. So all right. So in line with this, I have a follow up question for the two of you. This is my secret question behind door number two. What is so you've picked your era, right? We have the 1930s or let's say 20s, mid 20s into 30s. And then for Joseph, we have, I want to say, prime of your life,
1990.
1990. Okay. What is a problem of that time period that if you had the ability, let's say you could take all of your know how back to that time, that you would want to solve? So I know Joe, you already kind of said it. You said about petroleum products and oil and stuff like that. So what is a problem? So like, for example, like if you had said 1940s, I could say, well, you could bring back, I don't know, a machine gun or whatever and go and kill Hitler, right? That would be like an answer. So what's something that if you had the ability to change it, make it better, what is something of that time period you wanted to live in that you would want to change?
Well, first off, with the petroleum products, it's really more um, definitely the early 19th century because of how it affected the Middle East region, how it fractured a bunch of different civilizations, and it set the stage for what the kind of strife that we are dealing with now in so many ways. And plus, also the big idea of it is also kind of negate the greenhouse gases that we're dealing with, the plastic pollution that we're dealing with from the production of petroleum. There's so many different like offshoots of that. um wow, the 90s. um Probably how we looked at the internet. um I know that the internet kind of was created by the federal government and then kind of released to the public in the 90s. And we kind of saw it as this kind of holy grail that could kind of open up the whole world for us, and it definitely did. But if we saw kind of the pratfalls or the kind of negative aspects of what it turned out being, I maybe there could have been a little bit more brakes put on how fast we kind of adapted to the internet during the mid to late 90s. That would be one thing I would think of.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's a good one. The internet, I think that's a big one, honestly. So yeah, that's monstrous, because think about, when we talked about privacy one day, it was you and me, Rob. That kind of came out of that, right? The whole idea of the internet being like this free thing. Well, what do these companies figure out? Like, all right, well, we're gonna give it to you for free, but data is the new gold, right? It's like on Silicon Valley. One of the characters is like, my ancestors or my fathers mined gold, I mine data. And data that came out of the 90s, I imagine, I believe, right? That inkling of that was spawned in that time period. That's, yeah, I mean, that's massive. Who knows what the world would be like?
That's a good one. That's huge.
Said that.
Yeah, we've traded. I think we've had this discussion. We've traded a lot of our privacy and personal data for these gadgets and this technology. It's like a bartering system that they've rigged at this point.
I want to actually plug in a
Uh,
book right here, and this is
Go ahead.
then keep going. But there's a book called. Hold on one memento. There's a book I started reading today. This would have been great if we had talked about this when we talked about privacy that one day. But and this is more for you, just you guys, whoever's listening. Great, read this book. But the book is called The Art of Invisibility. The world's most famous hacker teaches you how to be safe online. And this book really, I was reading it today before this conversation, and it illuminates just how vulnerable. I don't even say vulnerable as in like could happen, is happening every day, every movement that you make online, like how you have no privacy. And that came out of just like what you said, Joe, that time period. Like now you have absolutely no privacy. Every one of your emails is read, your text messages are probably read. Um, and yeah, this will be a major problem of our life, but its origins, like you said, are in the 90s.
Indeed, definitely.
All right, so Rob, what about you? 1930s. What was going on then? What would you want to solve? What problem?
I would solve two things. I would, especially if I had the clout and the influence of a Howard Hughes type character, which is how I imagine myself. But uh, I would ensure two things. I would ensure privatization doesn't lead to monopolies. So like all these big studios and big businesses don't start gobbling each other, and then we end up with like Disney owning everything and Time Warner and all that. I would enact I would support laws that would enact federal laws that would deregulate things like that. So you can still have mom and pops and small businesses that can thrive and franchise themselves as well. And secondly, I would also enact like progressive social laws. So women can vote, they have their rights earlier. Minorities are still protected. They have immigrants. They have their right. I would make sure that the minorities and the lower demographics, or at least population wise, have their voices and their rights earlier than when eventually. Because still now to this day, we're still having these problems. So I would make sure even start that ball rolling from further back than when it actually started.
Yeah, that's. I mean, when did women get the vote? When was that passed into law?
Yeah, I would say 20s, but no, we're talking like the equal rights type thing. The equal rights movement wasn't until the 70s. Civil rights wasn't until the 60s. But voting was earlier. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the women's suffrage probably in the late 19 teens or 1920s.
Yeah, it's still the same. And it's because I would basically take those movements and start them earlier so that by the time we got to 2020 where we are now, we would be 40 years ahead of the curve than where we are.
That's the thing. I feel like it's peaks and
Mhm.
valleys though. There's always like a pushing back and forth, like a tussle between progressive values
It is true. That
and
is
then
scary.
kind of conservative values. And it like you'll if you look at throughout the time in
Hmm.
the 20th century, each decade has their kind of like a dominance, and then in the next decade that comes through, then there's like a pushback. And I don't know. I just feel like we're destined to repeat the same mistakes that we've been doing over and over again.
Can I throw an idea at you guys? And I'm just curious. This is in line with what you're saying, Joe. I heard a psychologist say this at one point. He was saying that like your political proclivity, and let's just say like conservative liberal. Let's just use those. Let's not even say politics. Let's just say a more conservative mindset and a more liberal mindset. And now they're saying, and I guess in psychology circles, it's become, I don't want to say well known, but I guess it's starting to be believed that there is a genetic there are aspects of your political beliefs, whether it's conservative or liberal, that are tied to you and have less to do with like what you, like. Oh, I've been confronted by arguments, and now because I've listened to these arguments, I choose to be on this side. It's more like even it might come to be like um a genetic part of your genetics. And his thesis or his hypothesis was that there's a positive to that. It's that it's like two sides of a coin, right? It's like you don't want a society to go too far in one direction. So there's like almost like ingrained in nature, like two sides that kind of are meant to not push on each other, but show each other blind spots. So like if a society goes too conservative, well, there's going to be a lot of it's just not that's not good. That's going to be like repression, right? Because you just are trying to maintain the status quo. And if a society potentially goes too liberal, well, it's possible that society kind of unravels. So that this guy was saying that, in nature, there's these two sides because they're meant to work together and to show each other the blind spots in each other's thinking. And now you're seeing it's become kind of like a war, a war between ideologies. When what if it's you're having actually a war against genetics, and you're never gonna win that war if there's a genetic proclivity inborn in.
I just have a hard time thinking it's genetics. I think that people are kind of when it comes to that line of thinking, they're a product of their time, a product of their experience. It's just I don't know. I just find it hard to believe it's a genetic thing. I feel like the generations that are coming up after us, uh, they technology and information is so readily available to them, so that they can see and kind of process things a lot easier than we could or the generations before us. So I feel like they're kind of they're more likely to be a little bit more liberal or progressive than the generations before us, and that's why kind of things are kind of speeding ahead at a kind of a very fast pace. And I think that the generations before us are kind of pushing back against that because the change is too fast. I I just it just I don't know. I can't really comprehend a leaning one way or the other because of genetics.
Yeah, but what you just said though, that even changes it entirely because then because the generation that came before us was also conservative and liberal. So you can't lump them all into the same camp. It's not like everyone that's over the age of 50 is by default conservative, because think about they lived through the 60s and some of them marched and some of them fought against what they consider like conservative views and the hippies and whatnot. So, I mean, every generation has its conservative and liberal. You might just what was considered liberal in the 60s might be considered conservative now. Like that's more like hindsight's 20. Now you're interpreting history, but of that time, you still had the same division. Like there were still people that would be labeled conservative of that time, and there would be people that were labeled liberal that time. Like if you grew up like I said, like go back in time, you're in 20 something in the 80s and 90s. Liberal then, if they could, if they could be confronted by what's considered like progressive and liberal now, they might be like, whoa, that's not the same camp that I'm in. But how they identify themselves would be, oh yeah, I'm liberal, progressive, whatever you want to word you want to use to describe it. I don't know. I'm not a geneticist. I don't know, but it was an interesting thought because I think as we delve into genetics, it's going to be more things are going to come out that have to do with how we. I think genetics in many ways is going to show that a lot of the things you thought you came to through reflection and introspection and through learning, some of those will be true, but I think some of them are going to be like, oh, you have a genetic proclivity. And I could be wrong. I don't know. Just curious.
I totally agree with you on the different eras. How one idea of being liberal would be completely considered conservative by another generation. I also totally think too, the older you get, the more likely you're likely to lean a bit more conservative because it's harder for you to adapt to change. You're kind of, once you get to your 30s and 40s, you're set in your kind of social status, your way of thinking for the most part. And I'm not going to throw a whole wide blanket up upon people who are in that age group that think a certain way, but I just feel like the older you get, especially the 60s, 70s, the more likely you're going to be set in your particular lane, and you're not going to be as open-minded as someone in their 20s.
Yeah, I think that's just natural. I think once the older you get, you've lived your life in that same perspective that whole time. And there's the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't just pull that from the clouds. That came from somewhere. So it's harder to change your perspective and to open your mind to new possibilities the older you get, because it's exactly what you said. It's like you building a concrete structure around your ideas and your viewpoint. And the younger you are, the more of the it's the lower that wall is, and the more you're like a sponge. You'll be like, okay, I can see that. Let me think about that. Let me do research. Let me talk to people. Let's have a discourse about that. The older you get, that's basically a fence or a gigantic like wall with a moat in front of it. So you're not going to penetrate that at all. So yeah, I think it is based on your age. It's also based on a lot of experience and circumstance that happens. So there's a lot of variables there, but overall, and then I'll throw it to you, Chris. I think overall, it's yeah, it's a generational thing for sure because of, like we said, like technology, societal, the climate that's like the social climate that we have today is just couldn't be more different than what it was in the 80s and then in the 40s and things like that. Uh, so I think circumstance and generations play a large part in that.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to be one of those people who says that they know things which are way outside of their knowledge base. None of us are doctors. We, if anything, we're philosophers. We try to think about things, and who knows. I wish so. Joseph Mark is laughing in the background. You can't hear him, but he's chuckling at my reference to him being a philosopher. Yes, Joseph Mark, you're a philosopher. That's the beauty of philosophy. Anyone can be a philosopher.
That's right. We're certainly not sociologists. I'll tell you that right out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I was listening to what you were saying, Joe, and I don't know the answer. I don't always agree with the whole idea that the younger generation is their ability to process information is better or they're easier, whatever, fill in the blank. Maybe for some, I'm not gonna lump everyone together. I see a lot of dumb people. And if anyone's listening to this and they're like, think that's rude to say, no, there's people. I say dumb in the sense that there are a lot of people who don't pay attention. And to me, like I've worked with people that are, yeah, they're freaking dumb, man. They do not pay attention. They're not observant. They are not self-reflecting. They are on cruise control through life. So for me, I kind of find it hard to believe. Like, I think we do live in a world where it's kind of easy to look like you believe in things and that you stand for things. But we've had this conversation, I think, many times. I know I've talked to Rob about this. It's easy. It's easy nowadays to make yourself look like you are a crusader or you are a fighter for change because you have no skin in the game. You are a social media, it's like with what's going on in the world. And for those of you who are listening, a lot of stuff is happening in the world right now, in New York City, in the world in general. And I'll go on, Facebook, and I just see everyone posting things. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you know, you're really not in the fight. You're just posting things. It's like, it's like what armchair quarterbacks. You're stating things. you're, complaining, da 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 da, and you might have valid complaints. I'm not saying that, but you're not fighting. You're not a freedom fighter. Are you donating any money to any of these groups that you believe are fighting and trying to create change? Are you yourself volunteering or doing anything? No. So you are what I call the porn of our generation is not pornography. It's outrage. People get off on outrage more than anything else. And you know it because the algorithms throw things at you that they know are going to outrage you. If you're conservative, well, you're going to get some crazy things that are going to make you outraged, angry. And if you're a very liberal or progressive person, you're going to get stuff on YouTube that's going to make you outraged. That is the world we live in. So I don't know. I tend to believe that like we got so much stuff going on in our brains below the surface that it's hard to really know if your actions, if your views, if your beliefs, even what you say is because you thought it, because you clearly thought through it, researched it, and then, like the crazy conspiracy theorists have all the pictures on the wall and you've drawn all the lines and you're like, oh, I found this is the truth. All of the lines intersect, they connect to this one thing. Um, no, most of us, I don't do that. I don't do that. I think any the things I say right now, I'm just talking out my ass. I haven't done any research on what I'm saying right now. It's my emotions. I'm just speaking from emotion. I'm speaking what's off the top of my head. And I just feel like that's most people. Like because you can communicate so easily, like in a moment of anger, you can go blast off some tweets. And did you really think about what you're saying? Is that tweet coming because you just read like 36 hours worth of data on that particular thing? No, you just were angry or you felt something. And because we have the ease of access of getting our views out there, it's like, well, that was an emotional response. Like that, you could have been hungry. You could have been angry. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing with like when someone gets angry with you. Well, we all know, right? There's the term, what is it? Hangry. So you're hungry and that's made you angry and now you got an argument with me. Well, is it because I said something or is really the root cause biology? You were hungry. You might not even been aware of how hungry you were, and that's changed your whole mood, which is now changing all of your actions and how you interact with people. So if that can if hunger can lead to that, it's like what else can your biology lead to? Like with what's going on in the world right now, people are pent up. We have so much energy. Would people have responded? And I'm not making any judgments because I don't even know. I don't know all the details. But do you think? And we've diverged from our subject widely. But do you think, with all the stuff that's going on in the world, it would be going on if people had not spent the last 3 months pretty much with no exercise at home, with all these pent up emotions and energies, and now we're just seeing the release? I'm not saying it's positive, rightly or wrongly, but like, yeah, I kind of believe that is part of what you're seeing. Like, I think there would have been outrage, but I don't know if there would have been the violence if people had been busy or were working or were going to the gym. Like, I definitely believe that what you're seeing now is influenced by the COVID lockdowns. And I could be wrong. Someone can make an argument against that, but like, how could it not? If you had to work tomorrow at 6 a.m., you had to be up and moving, and you had worked all day, do you think people would have the energy to be committing the acts of violence that they are? Maybe they would be. I don't know. That's my end of my rant.
Oh, I'm gonna follow that up with a supportive rant. That's what I'm gonna call this. I agree with you 100%. And the first thing I'm gonna say is, um, this lockdown, this pandemic, has for sure contributed to the actions of the protesters and the rioters and the looters and the government and all the analysts and all the athletes that are come. Everyone is going through this global generational pandemic, and everyone has this like visceral spinning energy inside of them that they haven't been able to literally exercise out, right? So that's in there. Then you couple that with a society that's been rotten with systemic racism and discrimination and anti-religious groups, anti-Semitism for centuries. Then you have the mental health about the lockdown, and then the physical health about getting sick. Then you have the leadership that all they do is stoke the flame instead of actually leading. Then you have people with nothing to lose, historic unemployment, their small business has failed, no chance of coming back. The job market is done. We're sitting on a bubbling, active volcano right now. And all of that has spun itself into a giant powder keg. And that's what we're sitting on here. So you're exactly right. The protests and all these demonstrations wouldn't be going down the way they're going down if it wasn't for all those ingredients going into the pot and getting cooked. Right? So that's the first thing I want to say. Then secondly is the thing that separates you, Chris, and I can speak for Joe and I myself as well, is we're self-aware about these things. The people that go on and rant and that just go on Facebook and disingenuously post things or post things for their own personal gain, they're not self-aware about what's happening. At least you, Chris, have the self-awareness, excuse me, to say, I might be talking out of my ass. I don't know. I didn't do hours of research. I'm not in the field. I'm not an expert on like societal issues or like sociology or any kind of medical type expert or any kind of like gender equality or racial equality. So I'm the same as me. I don't have any expertise in this, but you and I are aware of that. There's people that think they're experts in that go online and say, and a lot of those people are disingenuous. They're pretending to be outraged so that it makes them look cool and it makes them look progressive and it gets them more likes. And people could be like, oh, I like that person because he said something that he probably copied from another post and posted himself. He's real progressive, even though he's doing it completely for selfish reasons, right? So there you get a lot of that going on. So there's a lot of misdirection, but at least the three of us here know our place and know our limits. Not to say that doesn't take away from the fact that we support equality, we support everyone on an even playing field. I want everyone to be seen for who they are, not what they look like. Everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. But I'm not going to go on Facebook and start ranting. It's almost like you give everyone has their digital pulpit that they go on and they pretend that they're experts in this and whatever they say goes. And the thing that bothers me the most is if you don't agree with them and if you say, hey, wait, let's have a conversation first about this, all of a sudden you're branded, oh, you're evil, you're against me. Just because I want to talk to you about it and I don't instantly agree with you, that doesn't mean I'm against you at all. And that's the way social media has designed itself. If you don't instantly say, like, yeah, that's well said, you're against me. It's like, why have we created this realm? Or like, it's no longer a discussion at that point. It's either like what I say, and if you don't like what I say, you're actively trying to undermine what I say, which is not nearly anywhere remotely near the truth of these things. So that's the thing that bothers me, like the people that are pretending and exploiting this to try to use it for selfish reasons, and they've rigged the game to where if you do try to like level them out a little bit, be like, let's talk about this a little bit more. Not to say that I'm against you. Oh, you don't instantly agree with me, you're against
Yeah.
me.
So okay, I want to go off that, and Joe, I want you to chime in because I do feel like you tend to be passionate about a lot of this stuff. So I'd like to hear your since we've gone into current events, even though that wasn't in our intention. Like I'd be curious to hear your general opinion. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
So, kind of to bring it a little full circle, I think the the time that we're living in now is an accumulation of all of the different decades that have kind of come before us, and it's just kind of building and building and building. And it, I think we were way overdue. I think we it's been I think this kind of stuff that's happening now should have been happening 10 years ago, 20 years ago, after the Iraq War, um, after the financial crisis. I just think now is kind of like the perfect storm for all this happening with the pandemic, which is like you said, Chris, 30 to 40 million people unemployed with not much to do, and very little to be hopeful about in the future. And they're just fed up, and they want change, and they want change now. Um, it it's just a it's this big kind of snowball going, or avalanche going down the side of a mountain, and it's here now, and we have to kind of deal with it. And with technology being the way that it is, everyone is kind of very quick to put their views out for the world to see, but they're more unlikely to listen to what people have to say. They just want to say what they have to say instead of listening. I think that's a big thing that we need to try to get through is, yes, your voice matters, but we also have to listen to each other, because the only way that things are going to change is if we have kind of like that give and take. If we kind of listen to what people have to say. If we don't, then things are not going to change, and they're not going to change for the better.
That's well said. Yeah, very well said, Joe. Yeah, you're right. I think both. I actually like both of what both of you said. I think Rob, you're right. We're kind of been on a powder keg, and to what you said, Joe, that powder keg has been being filled for decades, and now you're seeing the eruption, and it's interesting because right, it's that eruption is linked to so many other decades. So it's like you can't even say like what happened that started that lit the fuse is not even really the ultimate thing, right? It's that's what lit the fuse, but it didn't fill the powder keg. So that's really interesting. I recall I was talking to a friend whom you guys all know, Henry, and Henry was telling me about a book. Like this was actually we talked about this. We had this conversation before the COVID thing, like let's say like weeks before it became what it became. And he had read a book, and the book predicted it said some things. I can't recall the name of the book, but in essence, the book was saying that there are different eras, and it's almost like history is a wave, and it kind of charted the wave, and it would be like, all right, it almost found a pattern, and it was saying that in different times in history, like the wave crashes, and then that was I don't know, the 60s or something like that. And the book said that 2020 there was going to be a new wave. Henry, we talked about this. He was like, yeah, 2020 is, the book says, it's kind of due. And that's a little bit like, pseudo science. Is not really real. I never read the book, but it was interesting. It was kind of saying like we're due for another upheaval. And if you read history, upheavals happen, right? They happen over and over and over again. Rome didn't last. It eventually, the wave crashed, and it crumbled. So I guess we can hope that this wave doesn't destroy, but it's definitely going to probably change. And I'm curious what you guys think about. I'm going to ask you guys one more question for this podcast that we're doing today. And the question is, in your opinion, as individuals, how do you approach change? Right, we're watching all this stuff happen. You have the COVID. We've gone so far from the topic. You have the COVID. You have now you have this social upheaval, right? So you had all this unemployment, you have businesses failing, you have people unemployed, health, people dying. So that's one big thing. Right now you have these social things that are happening, societal, this trauma, these rioting and the rallies and whatnot. How do you as individuals deal with this change that you are watching? Um, what is your way to deal with it? Whoever wants to answer that. If does that make sense? Just tell me if that made sense.
It made sense. So the way I deal with it, I tend to look at history, just like you said, Chris. It's more of a wave, and there's always highs and lows. I know right now there's definitely kind of a low. You look at like the 1910s, and you had a couple of pandemics, and then you had kind of like following that you had the Roaring Twenties, and then kind of a crash after that. So you just have to weather the storm. That's the way I kind of see it. Don't get too bogged down or too uh, put off by kind of the things that are happening around you. Just try to be a little bit more a little bit more persistent in terms of what you want the world to be, and how you want, what are the things that you want to take away from the world that you live in, and just keep pushing forward. That's the best thing you can do, because like I just feel like there's going to be waves. It's just going to come in certain times where things are good and change happens in a positive, effective way, and then there are going to be times directly followed by that where there's going to be a bad turn, or things are going to be kind of pushed back to where things are things are not kind of where you want it to be, and you just have to kind of deal with it and push forward. Live the one life that you have to live it, and never try to take it for granted.
I like that. I like that. Um, Mine is similar. It's it's this. If now, all right. So we're like you said, Chris. We're already dealing with all those things. So let's take this as an opportunity. It's the way my that would be my call to action. Let's not squander this opportunity. Let's talk to each other. Let's find out what's best for us moving forward. Let's not impose our perspectives and our beliefs on other people. Both sides, all sides, like conservative, liberal, extreme, like it doesn't matter. Like non-religious, religious, it's whatever side you're on. Let's take this opportunity to have a commune with one another. Let's advance our society in an intelligent way. Let's not, because not everything is purely black and purely white. Some things are yes or no, but there's some things where there's a giant gray area, and I think in this country in particular, I I don't think I can speak for every society around the world, but in America, definitely, it's either you're with me or you're against me. There's no middle ground anymore. Let's take advantage of all these scenarios that's allowing us the time and the opportunity to discuss this gray area where we can learn about each other and we can advance ourselves in an intelligent, clever, and smart way rather than if you don't like what I'm saying, you're wrong, and then shutting it out. Let's open our mind, let's open the discourse, the table, let's have everybody at the table, and let's just have it out in an intelligent, non-violent way. That being said, I do understand the feelings of some people that are just, they've had enough, they've seen enough, especially like the elder minorities of our country have they've seen the 60s, they've seen the 70s, 80s, 90s, where it was even more pronounced. It wasn't even covert. Now it's more covert in the 21st century, but back then it was just overt racism and discrimination. Now it's hidden, but it's still there. So they're just, and their legacy. So their sons, their daughters, their granddaughters, their grandchildren. They're just tired of it, And I can understand that part of it. And that's where I think you get the pent up frustration of all these people that you see now. And when you like we the three of us said, when you sprinkle in all those other ingredients, then you get the powder cake. That's what we get now. But let's take a step back. Let's see this as an opportunity to just have just a conversation about everything. Let's see each other out. Let's hear each other out, and let's see if we can move forward and advance ourselves intelligently.
Awesome. Guys, I appreciate you both um, having this conversation. I didn't really expect it to go in this direction. I didn't expect to talk about what's actually current event, what's going on in the world. But I just want to tell you, like, I really value both of your philosophies and outlooks on life. You both are very, I don't want to say stable, but yes, stable, clear-eyed people who I truly believe try to understand a situation before they give their opinion on it, and I believe that is few and far between. So I'll tell you, as someone who knows you and who has had conversations with you, like, I value it, and it's awesome. Like, it should be celebrated because, just like you said, Rob, that is important. Like, we got to get past the right wrong, or the black and white, because a lot of things aren't, they're gray, and to change one thing affects this thing, and we have a system, and systems are not perfect. So I appreciate both of you that you try to think, and yeah, like, I think both of you are right. You have to, Joe, like, I really liked what you said. You have to try to live your best life. And you have no control of the times you were born into, but you do have control to some degree over how you deal with it, how you perceive it, how you let it affect you. And you can choose to try to adapt. And I hate to say that because, there are hardships, and maybe you shouldn't have to adapt. But at least the way I look at it, the world's not fair. It's not. It's like not a fair place, and it's not a safe place, and nowhere was that promised to you. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just, to me, in my eyes, I state it as what I perceive to be a reality. So I value that both of you kind of accept that to some degree, and don't get worked up or consumed by the tornado. You hold yourselves away from that and try to look at it with clear eyes. And that's why you guys are here talking with me today. So we've been talking for about 2 hours. You guys want to say any final words on this subject or the topic we started this conversation when we've definitely kind of gone way far. We've crossed the river and we're in a new country at this point. So I'm gonna hit it to you, Joe. Do you have any final words, any thoughts, anything that's coming to your mind?
It's natural for us to kind of navigate to this. I feel that it's kind of affecting almost every way of how we live. From March up until now, it's just been kind of another shitstorm after another. So it makes sense for us to, especially considering the topic that we covered, which is the different eras. It makes sense for us to kind of circle back to the era that we're living in now. So I wouldn't say that we kind of drifted too far, but yeah, I'm all for change, but I my thing is always be aware that change never lasts. It can always go back, and it usually does go back and forth. So just kind of try to be persistent in terms of what your values are, and live your life. That's my last two cents.
Nice, nice. Yeah, so like Joe said so eloquently, um, I say there's two things you can do. You can control what you think, and you can control how you behave. And if you just stick to that, for the most part, you can lead a fulfilling existence, I would say. But also keep an open mind to other discourses. And the last thing I want to say is anyone is hosting a swinging Hollywood party, reach out to me. I will fly out to Los Angeles and attend that party.